Well, good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
It's nice to be called the busiest man in British politics. I hope you're not yet another one of those people in UKIP suggesting I need a long break, are you? Had a bit too much of that in May, didn't we? Enough of that. It's good to be, it's the second time I've been able to address the Young Independents Conference, UKIP for the under-30s. And when UKIP started, and in fact for about the first 7 years, I was the only person in UKIP that was under the age of 30. So it's good to see our growth. I'm not going to conduct a long post-mortem about the general election, other than to say this. If you'd said to me a year ago there was going to be a Conservative majority, I'd have laughed very loudly. If you'd said to me that because of the SNP and Labour there'd be this dramatic swing, and that despite all of that, that UKIP would still have got 4 million votes, I'd have bitten your arm off. And I think the point is this. Probably half of those who voted for us in 2014, when we got 28% and won those European elections, about half of those people didn't actually stick with UKIP in this general election, so fearful were they of that ghastly woman from north of the border, and the idea that Ed could actually walk down aircraft steps anywhere in the world as our leader. And yet we still got nearly 4 million votes. And why? Because we bit not just hard into the Labour vote, but the most significant achievement, I think, is we were getting people between 30 and 45, working couples typically, many of whom, most of whom, had never voted in their lives. And they turned out and voted UKIP. And if you add to that many of the others who voted Tory in this election, but actually left the polling booth, almost feeling ashamed about what they'd done, then I think really the true size of the People's Army probably is between 5.5 and 6 million people. So our achievements, really since 2012, our achievements have been very significant indeed. Difficult just to have one MP, but never ever in the history of British democracy have so many been represented by so few. However, if there was a consolation prize, it's a pretty blooming big consolation prize, because we are going to have a referendum. The referendum that I didn't think we were going to have, and the referendum that Mr. Cameron didn't want to have to deliver. But now he's got to do it. And I know you're going to be talking today about the amazing opportunities we have next May the 5th, in Wales and Scotland and Northern Ireland and London. And yes, I want to see UKIP win elected representation on all 4 of those parliamentary bodies, and I believe we will. But what I want to talk to you about today really is the referendum. And I say that because even though UKIP has taken the best part of my adult life in terms of working for it and trying to make it decent and respectable and electable, my motivation in politics isn't just about passes, and it most certainly isn't about careers. My motivation in politics has always been about changing things and changing this country for the better. I would never ever have entered politics had it not been for the European issue. I absolutely, totally, firmly believe that what those that went before us fought, defended and sacrificed so much for was so that we and successive generations could be free, independent, democratic people, and I will do my damnedest to make sure we return to that state of affairs. Now, there are lots of people out there in politics who call themselves Eurosceptics, and who, privately in conversation will agree with so much of the UKIP agenda. But because they're tied to the Conservative Party or to the Labour Party, they always rather fear speaking out in public. They're concerned about their loss of promotion prospects. They're concerned perhaps about being deselected. And I think, to be honest, what we're witnessing right at the moment in this referendum campaign is a little bit worrying. The Yes campaign are in full flight, aren't they? Every single day, you turn on the television and there's somebody saying we must vote yes. Including this week, I thought, somewhat disgracefully, and very relevant to many of you in the room, 24 vice-chancellors of British universities saying that unless we get some of our own taxpayers' money back, the British university system will collapse. I thought that was absolutely disgraceful, and I think we must take battle to those vice-chancellors, and we must expose the fact that right now, today, active in British universities, there are over 230 Monet professors teaching history, economics and politics from an EU perspective and funded by the European Commission. So if the Vice-Chancellors of your respective universities want to punch up, I'm up for it, and I hope you are too. And of course, it would be difficult being in Nottingham, not to mention our great friend Kenneth Clarke. I have to say, I knew UKIP was doing well. I knew we were doing well in the run-up to the 2013 English County Council elections, when on Sky News that Sunday morning at about 10:30, they went live to Ken Clarke in his garden in Nottinghamshire, wearing some bizarre grey turtleneck affair, and looking, although he'd been dragged through a hedge backwards after an exceptionally heavy Saturday night, Ken denounced UKIP as a bunch of clowns, which was terrific, wasn't it? And I think he probably put 2 or 3% on our overall national score in that election campaign. Ken Clarke, who of course is a famous son of Nottingham, actually, I have to say this, is one of the nicest people in politics you could actually meet. You know, he's a proper bloke. He's into his football and his cricket and his jazz, and he's a very sociable, personable man. He just happens to be fundamentally wrong on virtually everything. And it's remarkable, after a 40-year career in politics, he's now on the BBC more than he's ever been, every week telling us we must vote to stay in. And we've got Sir Richard Branson appearing on television telling us not only should we stay in, but we should join the Euro. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Branson. We'll be using that again and again during the course of this campaign. And even President Obama, I mean, you name it. So the Yes campaign are in full flight. And the No campaign, comprised of, as I say, self-declared Eurosceptics, have decided that the best thing to do is to wait, is to do absolutely nothing, and see what Mr. Cameron comes back with in this renegotiation. Let me explain to you why that is a dreadful, dreadful flaw. What is happening at the moment is Cameron, on the back of an extraordinary election victory, is having something of a honeymoon period with the press and the public. That, if you think about it, isn't terribly surprising. And he is being allowed to set the terms of this renegotiation. And he set it on changing migrant benefits, on perhaps getting back 1 or 2 bits of power over workers' rights, and he clearly is going to get some sort of IOU that says Britain won't be committed to further political union. It'll be about as worthless as that piece of paper that Chamberlain bought back 75 years ago. But they're the terms of the debate that Cameron is being allowed to set. And the more that he's allowed to set those terms, and the less that he's challenged on those terms, the greater his own credibility with the British public on this issue becomes. Because if he sets that agenda and he's unchallenged, and if Mrs. Merkel and Monsieur Hollande and Mr. Juncker, have to catch him in the morning, but there we are. I like him as well, actually, he's rather jolly. Did you see he nicked my sign the other day? Did you see that? I had my Greek no Oxy sign on my desk, and I turned around. I thought, well, where's it? The Commission President had nicked it. So you know what I did? I went and nicked it back. And he said to me, oh, next time we're going to come and take that Union Jack off your desk. I said, you've been trying that for years. You So if Cameron is allowed to set the terms, and if it becomes accepted that what this renegotiation is about are those very modest technical terms, then when he comes back and says to the British people, I've got a good deal, they'll say, well done him, we better vote for him. So this policy that's being pursued by these Conservative and Labour Eurosceptics in Westminster is a disaster. Because the polling that we published this week, you'll see, when the British people are asked what would they like to see renegotiated, well, they want to see a renegotiation of the free movement of peoples across Europe. And is it any wonder, with the crisis at Calais and the total inaction from this government, that that issue is, and I believe will remain, at the top of the list. They want to see a renegotiation that gives the British Parliament and the British courts the ability to overrule European law. You know, 2/3 of British people, in that massive opinion poll that we conducted, 2/3 of British people think it's vital that Britain at least has a veto. And those in the room that are older will remember that the real reason why the yes side won so convincingly back in 1975 is because in those days we did actually have a veto. And the third thing that the British people want to see renegotiated is the cost. And is it any wonder in straitened times that people do ask the question, why are we giving £55 million a day to an organisation whose accounts have not been signed off for the last 19 years in a row? And none of this is Mr. Cameron being challenged. So, folks, we have got to challenge the Prime Minister. We have got to try to set the agenda. And I believe that if UKIP are organised enough and professional enough and take the lead with these arguments, then I believe the others will actually get up off their backsides and come into line and help us with this campaign. So that's what we've got to do, and we're starting from the first week of September, the biggest outreach campaign this party has ever attempted. We've already got 250 venues booked from September through to the spring of next year, and I would be really pleased if YI came to me and said, you know, could we help and sponsor debates at universities or debates at sixth form colleges, and we'll work with you, because let's make sure we get this debate happening as far and wide as possible. We can't win this referendum unless we change the terms of the renegotiation, that's for sure. But equally, we can't win this referendum if our key players spend their time just visiting and walking around the TV studios in Westminster. We've got to get out and reach the country. And what's really interesting about the age dynamic, I mentioned earlier how the voters that turned out on May the 7th for UKIP this year were on average very much younger than any other voter base that has supported us before. Across the rest of Europe, the opposition to the project is coming from the under 30s. You know, when Sweden rejected the euro all those years ago, it was estimated that 70% of under 30s said no to giving up the crown. When the Dutch rejected the European Constitution, again it was overwhelmingly the young that voted that way. If you look at Beppe Grillo's 5-star movement, by the way, Beppe's coming to the conference in Doncaster in September. Believe me, you've never seen anything like it in all your life. It's terrific stuff. I mean, it really is. But if you look at Beppe's movement, they got, I mean, their best ever result was 8 million votes in Italy. So a very, very significant political party. And when I talk to Beppe, he believes 70% of his vote is under the age of 40. And 50% of his vote is under the age of 30. If you look at the Syriza movement, and you know, we may think they're misguided in some ways, but if you look at that movement, it's young people. So right across Europe, from the north, the south, Le Pen's movement, wherever you look, on the right, the centre, the left, what you're seeing is a younger generation who view this European Union, who view its lack of democracy, who view its economic failures, and who say, look, just because this is the status quo doesn't mean we should be prepared to put up with it. We want to change things. So it is the youth across Europe that are voting for change. Now, we have not yet got to that situation in Britain. We still have a problem, particularly with the sort of 18 to 30 voter, in that still a majority of them, at the moment, think the status quo is okay. And I guess in some ways, there are many of you that have been brought up from primary school onwards, you know, who've been given literature and talks about how this wonderful European Union has brought peace and prosperity, and isn't it wonderful? And as the parent of 4 children, I've now been banned from attending any parents' evenings at any of the schools my kids go to, because I've objected to this vociferously at every measure. So there is an element that, you know, young people in Britain have been brought up to believe this is the right thing to believe in. And perhaps because we haven't joined the euro, you know, you guys haven't seen perhaps just how damaging this project can be to your lives. And the better educated you are, the less you will understand that damage. You know, if you're a 16-year-old school leaver looking to get manual labour, working on building sites, or working in the agricultural industry, then you will know, because you will see that your jobs have been squeezed and your wages have been decompressed. So we've got a massive job to do, and you and young independents have got a really fundamentally important job to do. And what I'm saying to you is, whatever abuse we might have got from the National Union of Students, whatever abuse we've had from the national press over the course of the last 2 or 3 years, although, to be fair, most of it's directed at me and not the rest of you, but whatever abuse we've had, there has been a very persistent establishment attempt to blacken and darken the name of UKIP, to paint us out to be this awful group of people. And I understand that one of your speakers at this conference yesterday was very concerned about this and thought we must fundamentally change the way we speak and the way we act in response to it. And the answer to that is no. No. Because the truth about UKIP, and I saw this at the Margate conference, the Margate Spring Conference last year, the truth about UKIP actually is we are a gloriously eclectic bunch of people. And we couldn't give a damn, you know, what your hair colour is, or your sexuality. We're not interested. We don't care. We're not interested. Everyone who's a law-abiding, legal citizen of this country is welcome to be part of our party. And the reason we mustn't buckle to this criticism is that in the end, folks, the good guys win. In the end, the truth will out. And I think even since that general election, it's beginning to. It's beginning to. We're not seeing quite the same level of ad hominem attacks. So however tough it may have been for young people to stand up in schools, colleges and universities and say they're UKIP supporters, and I know there are people in this room, you know, who've had difficulties with friendships and with their work in colleges, and I admire you, you know, for having the courage to stick with this. Actually, folks, it is going to get easier. It's going to get easier. They will not be able to blacken our name in the same way, because it just isn't working anymore. And here's the other thing. If I think back to that referendum in 1975, and I was very young, if I think back to that referendum, those on the no side were making the traditionalist argument. And nothing wrong with that. They were making the traditionalist argument that actually Britain should stand alone, that Britain always had stood alone, and that we shouldn't turn our backs on our friends in the Commonwealth. But the yes side's argument was well and good, though all of that is. There is this trendy, extraordinary, fantastic economic miracle in France and Germany going on that we've got the opportunity to hitch ourselves to. And I really think that, you know, my mother thought that being part of this European club was a very trendy, liberating, modern, exciting thing to do. That we'd be better off culturally, that the food would improve, which thank God it has. And, you know, and so the point I'm making is this: they had, the yes side had the progressive argument, okay? And if we are going to overturn the status quo position, which is the advantage that David Cameron has, we need to take the progressive position. And I think now we can. I think it's pretty clear to people, and many on the left in British politics are waking up to this, it's pretty clear to people with the way that Greece has been treated over the course of the last month, that this is an authoritarian, rather nasty organisation who don't care what suffering they put people through, who view democratic outcomes of referendums as being frankly irrelevant, all in pursuit of their own goal. They are the nationalists. They are the ones that seek to impose their agenda. They are the ones defending a system that increasingly doesn't work at any level. And we, and you, are the ones telling your age group in this country that here's an opportunity to take back our democratic birthright. Here's an opportunity for us to be in control of our lives, for us to chart the course under which we're going to have to live and work and get married and do the things that people do as they get older. That we are the ones who will be arguing openly and clearly in this referendum that actually, you know, great though Europe as a place is, there's a lot more going on in the world. There's Singapore, there's Brazil, there's a whole global economy out there. And that only by cutting our ties with this outdated customs union can we embrace being part of the world. That we are the ones, the only ones, that can actually turn immigration, which has made so many British people's blood boil over the last few years, and is doing so with the scenes from Calais every week. We can say, look, actually, UKIP's not against immigration, but we're the only ones that can put in place an Australian-style point system, which means that people who come to Britain will have skills, trades, won't have criminal records, and will benefit this country. We're the ones, actually, that can push the modernist agenda. And if we get that tide right, and if people begin to understand that actually the risks to Britain are greater staying inside this European club than they are breaking free from it and becoming the masters of our own destiny again, if we do that, then we can win this referendum. And I'm going to need, as party leader, your help to fight this massive national campaign. And in return, you know, if you come to us as an organisation with ideas for conferences and debates, we will do all we can to support you. Thank you very much.